meeting for our quarterly meeting for the Racial Justice Oversight Body. Can the folks online hear me? Yeah, all good. Great. Good. Well, I was going to ask if there are any announcements today from Ms. Gigi.
Yes, I wanted to thank this body for sending out the flyer about the therapy session that we held last week in Antioch. It was well attended and made a lot of progress toward having urban males talk about the challenges that they face. And then later that evening, we got a call from Steph Curry, who wanted to give some funding to continue the efforts in this county.
That's really excellent. And thanks for sharing that, Gigi. Anybody else? Anybody online have any announcements? Talk about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Peter Kim for the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. I wanted to share that, you have a flyer, thank you. So really born out of conversation in this space, from this space, we will be co-sponsoring a couple community screenings of a film. It's called Judging Juries. It's a short documentary made by a local filmmaker, but it's really just kind of highlighting the need for more equity, more diversity, more representation on juries. And so this is something that came out of this conversation. Ellie had brought it up, and so we had also then raised that idea to Dinah, and we're going to have two screenings of this film. One is going to be in the west part of the county at Rise Youth Center on May 16th. There'll be another screening in the east part of the county in Antioch at New Delta Bay Church in Antioch. That's a partnership with Safe Return Project. And so we're going to have film, and then we'll also have a panel with both our public defender, our district attorney, retired Judge Brenda Harper from Alameda County, as well as Dr. Kurt Lynch, community researcher, and for the Antioch one, we'll also have a community advocate and all that. So yeah, it's going to be a nice opportunity to have some community conversation to talk about an issue that definitely impacts our county, but it's really a national issue. So it's just great opportunity to get our folks on our job in the same space to have a productive conversation with community. It's free, all ages. On May 30th. So both on a Thursday evening from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. 5 p.m. to 6:30. May 16th, May 30th. At Rise and restriction. Amen.
Thank you so much. Are there any other announcements?
I do have one. Safe Return Project, we're hosting, I think this is our 6th cohort for our Richard Boyd Fellowship. We're having a graduation May 31st at our office in Richmond off of McDonald Avenue. We welcome everybody to come join and celebrate our fellows that are graduating.
We skipped introduction, so maybe I'll have Sheila start.
Yeah, actually, Ariana, did you want to do a yeah, roll call? Sure.
Shayla, would you like me to do a roll call?
Yes.
Okay, starting with Chief Issa Eamon Kraus, Ellen McDonald,
Present.
DA Diana Becton, Lynn Mackey,
Present.
Gilbert Salinas,
Present.
Shayla Bonner,
Present.
Stephanie Medley, Ronell Ellis,
Present.
Cheryl Suddeth, Matthew Malone, Alberto Garibay,
Present.
LaShante Smith, Melvin Willis, and Gigi Crowder.
Thank you. Next, we want to have introductions for the folks that's on Zoom. Um,
that new stretch.
Starting with Kendra.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kendra Carr, the co-director of the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice.
Alejandra.
Hi, good afternoon. Alejandra Sanchez, District Representative for Supervisor Ken Carlson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris James with the W. Haywood Burns Institute.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Leach with the Multi-Faith Action Coalition.
Good afternoon, Kiki Ferris, Assistant Chief Probation Officer.
Ariana. I want to leave you out.
Hello, Garyana Youngblood, Office of Reentry and Justice.
Peter Kim with ORESJ.
Hi all, Patrice Guillory, Office of Reentry and Justice.
Offer the introduction and the executive.
Hello, everyone.
Great, so at this time, we're gonna take public comment on any items under this jurisdiction of the racial justice oversight body, but not on today's agenda. Any public comment online on any item under our jurisdiction, but not on the agenda? I don't see any hands, and then Gigi?
Yeah, I shared at an earlier meeting that I was watching a video and it made me realize that if we don't have everyone at the table, then maybe we can do a lot of great work here. But if the judges are not also participating in the effort to reduce racial disparities in this county, then we won't. Often as the executive director of mental health program, go into court with individuals and I champion and advocate and educate the judges about mental health. So often individuals have committed a crime and they're not saying they're not guilty, but they have done it when they're untreated for their mental illness. So we have the same level of misunderstanding around the racial disparity. So I just think that if we're going to make any real progress with this group and the public defender here and the DA there, then the judges have to be on board as well. But making decisions that they're responsible for without the biases that we often see. So I don't know what the next step for something like that would be, but it was a Tupac. I don't know how familiar you are with the rapper Tupac, but he was on a video and he said he sat in a courtroom for 2 weeks and the judge never made eye contact with them. And so he felt like the judge was already biased toward him. And so he said, just do whatever you've already decided you're gonna do. And a lot of the young people that I work with feel that way as well, that they're not fairly represented. So this is a good step in the right direction with having jurors that are truly peers. And then some of you may have heard the news about what's happening in Alameda County with released information around jurors who are African-American and Jewish, not being selected, but you have to go through a whole process looking at those cases. So to avoid things like that happening, perhaps we should be including judges, a judge to represent this panel. Thanks.
Thank you, Gigi. Any other public comments?
Can I mention one quick thing? At the next CCP meeting, which is scheduled for May 13th. Yes, May 13th. There will be a set of recommendations that will be presented to the full partnership from the Community Advisory Board with regards to the one-time 15 million from the 849 fund balance. So the CAB has concluded its series of planning sessions over the last several months and will be presenting those final recommendations to the full partnership. This was in result of not only their advocacy to the CC, but also the Public Protection Committee, also recognizing that it's a great opportunity to utilize some of the resources that are within that fund balance to expand reentry services. And so that's the main thing to note, in connection with this body is that that's in direct alignment with one of the recommendations, from the Racial Justice Task Force, which was to figure out a way in which there can be an expansion of resources into some of the work that the CCP is doing. So I wanted to uplift that for all of you. Many of you in the room are probably going to be at the meeting anyway, but for those of you who weren't planning, it's May 13th at 10:30 in this room too.
Any other public comments? All right, so we're gonna move on to the approval of the record of action. Our last meeting was February 29th. That was our quarterly meeting, and if you look at attachment 1, pages 4 through 6, detail the record of action. I'll give everybody just a minute or two to look at it.
I'll move to adopt the record of action.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt the record of action. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Gigi. And Garyana, can you take a vote?
Yes, I can, Ellen, but who motioned?
Motion from Issa,
Got you,
second from Gigi.
got you. Yes, I can take a roll call vote. Issa?
Yes.
Ellen?
Yes.
DA Diana Beckton?
Yes.
Lynn Mackey?
Yes.
Gilbert Salinas?
Yes.
Shayla Bonner? Ronell Ellis?
Yes.
Alberto Garabee?
Yes.
LaShante Smith?
Yes.
Gigi Crowder?
Yes.
10 yeses, motion carries.
Thank you so much, Garyana. Next, we are going to receive an update from Patrice Guillory on the joint meeting with the Racial Justice Oversight Body and the Equity Committee.
Yes, thanks, Ellen. So at the last equity committee meeting, which was in May, it was in April last month, Chris James from Burns Institute was able to present an annual update as he usually does every year. This is the first time I believe he presented to the equity committee. And in doing so, presented and shared overview of the work that the our job has been engaged in over the past previous year, and also lifting up some of the discussion points that are of critical concern and priorities for our job looking ahead. One of which was to create a direct pathway or a line of communication with the supervisors in a way that didn't sort of stymie or slow down the process of really moving a lot of the proposals forward. As a result of that conversation, it was recommended that there be a joint meeting or special meeting between the Racial Justice Oversight Body and the Equity Committee. Both supervisors, Boulay and Glover, agreed. And so what we will be planning for pretty soon between the Office of Reentry and Justice, Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, who also staffs the Equity Committee, is how do we make that meeting happen? So we'll be doing some work offline to schedule a future special meeting. We're looking at the existing Equity Committee dates as a possible opportunity. Those are usually the third Monday of every month in the afternoon, I believe.
Morning.
Equity Committee?
Yes.
10:30.
10:30, I'm sorry. PPC is the one that, okay, too many meetings to keep up with.
It used to be at 10:30, now it's at 11.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, bumped.
So, Equity third Monday of the month at 10:30 a.m. That might be a possibility, but we also want to keep in mind you all schedule, so we will be likely doing some dual polling to try to find the best possible meeting time and date that would work for many of you. So at this time, we can open the floor for two purposes. One is scheduling wise, and we're starting to slowly creep upon summer months, and typically for this body, a lot of folks taking vacation time. There's different things that are happening, and we want to be cognizant of that. So there are certain dates, months, what have you, that we need to absolutely avoid. It would be good for us to know that. And then also, given that this is a really imperative meeting, I would think, it's probably necessary to open the floor to have conversation about some specific agenda items that you all would want to share and uplift and engage in conversation with those supervisors on. So, and I don't know, maybe I missed anything else, Chris, in terms of the conversation that took place or discussion that took place at the equity committee meeting, or Peter, if there's anything else you'd like to add for further context for folks.
If I could just, so Kendra and I did talk a little bit about timing. And if we are going to use the equity committee as the space like dedicated for this joint meeting, September might be a month that works out well in terms of what we kind of envision for the year in terms of what we on the agenda, where September might be that month where we could just dedicate the entire equity committee to issues that pertain to our job. But I don't know if that's either too far ahead or not for this group, so that's just the thing.
The third Monday of the month typically.
That would be September 16th.
So if we can take scheduling first, I don't know if folks have, we should just do a doodle poll, or if you want to kind of take general feedback from the group. I think to Peter's point, September could be safe in that we are likely to have most folks back in action by September and not be missing a big chunk of our body, but it is a little ways out. So I don't know if do folks feel like September is a reasonable goal?
Out of town, but I think as long as you make one. I'll reschedule. I have to move my management meeting, but otherwise I can bump that to the prior week.
Okay. Great, and then in term Gigi.
Well, generally I do attend that meeting, but I go to federal governor's office, so probably better to have everyone in one room. Would it be here? Or would it...
Oh yeah, good question. I mean, I think this is a great time for us to give that feedback to Peter and Kendra and whoever else is working on taking it. So I don't know if you have a sense of what would be a better way to engage.
I don't know, usually Supervisor Joy has.
Yeah,
folks in
it's
his
in
office,
East and West, right?
East and West, so
Right.
maybe a central location would make sense if we're gonna come together.
Right.
A big impact.
Chris has his hand raised. Hi, Chris.
Hi. So just a couple of points here. One, and I mean I'm not in the room, right? So I can only see so much. But I want to encourage you all to be very, very vocal right now. If Monday late mornings, does not sound like something that usually works for your schedule, to speak up and be heard about that. If there are other days that maybe work better, especially if you want to do this before September. I think that far out, we could probably move enough things around for enough people that it would work. But remember that what we're trying to do here is provide you all the space to speak directly to the equity committee. I mean, obviously, we would love to have every supervisor there, but we will start with what we have. Just to talk about what the limitations and frustrations have been in terms of what you are attempting to do and how the work and the body is structured and needing to make further recommendations about how to implement something based on recommendations that have already been made. So I bring that up just to say, if we are waiting until September, which makes sense in terms of summer coming up and vacation and all of that, it just means that over the course of, in some ways, over the course of the next several months, you know, to the extent that folks are feeling, you know, the limitations of the way that things are currently structured, that your forum to really speak to that is delayed until September. So just, you know, that's for you guys to think about in terms of, you know, if you want to wait that long, and if not, there's a need to be vocal about whether or not, you know, a Monday morning meeting is the space for you all that works the best versus something else. And so I'm simply reminding you all that you don't have to, that's a decent option, nothing wrong with that, but that shouldn't be, you know, your default. If there are, you know, issues surrounding your availability with that and you'd like to be present, we would need to hear that to accommodate it.
Does anybody have a sense, to Chris's point, if, you know, a Monday morning wouldn't be something that would work well, or if you wanted us to try to push ahead earlier, before September, even if it's with a smaller segment of our group. And in terms of whether we need quorum, is it joint meeting? Would we need our job quorum as well? Okay. So we would have to have quorum, which I know we've struggled with. So, do you have?
Not really, I mean, we gotta have it at some point. It's not gonna fit everybody's schedule, that's the tough part, you know. Oh, yeah, no, I don't have any specific, you know, quorums about it. I just think that, you know, it needs to be scheduled, but going based on my schedule wouldn't help a lot either, because I take a lot of vacation. But so, you know, I just contribute, so and it's through September. So, but you know, I will go around best I can.
Appreciate that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think Mondays are tough for me because I have staff meeting, but I'm willing to move things around myself. June, July, I can tell you right now, it's not gonna work for me. Okay.
So do folks feel like if we stick for a September goal, that'll at least give us advanced planning and clear their calendar and prioritize it? And I know maybe Patrice and her team work on reaching out to people who might have limitation. In terms of agenda items that we would address with the equity committee, I know one thing that came up during recent it was the issue of us struggling with quorum. And I know that the county is working on state legislation to allow advisory bodies to have more remote membership and to kind of change the existing requirements, which are what are hamstringing us at the moment. So I think the county hears us loud and clear on that. And I know there's advocacy to help on that front. But there are many things that I know we need to interface with the Board of Soups about. So do you all want to try to make kind of a list so that we can sort of prioritize for that conversation and start our planning? So thoughts on agenda for the joint meeting of the RJOB and the Equity Committee, which will be
we need to create an agenda so we make good use of the time.
for specific agenda items. I mean, it does seem that it's really tracking to our work plan and where we land on the items that we're trying to move forward. And it's a great opportunity, I think, to ask for any other support we need to help us kind of build capacity and be successful in both our community engagement and ensuring that we're you know, pushing for the reforms that are on our list. I know we're going to talk about the jury piece later, but that has come up a lot recently. And so one thing you'll hear from me in a minute for that meeting is something that also came up at the budget meeting is going to be my office's, maybe this this body's request to move forward with having the Board of Supervisors formally request that the courts cease pulling jurors from a countywide pool and move to the regional model. That's on our agenda a little bit later, but just in terms of making a list, that would be one thing that I think could be discussed, and we may have moved a little further in our conversations before then. But I do think that the bulk of the work plan items that we can talk about whether it makes sense to go in depth at that meeting.
Alan?
Oh,
Were there any former, like, written recommendations that this group took to the board, that, to the supervisors, that need to be revisited?
That this, no formal, written recommendations outside of the racial justice task force recommendations. So those are still what is standing, and what this body is essentially charged with sort of steering the implementation of. Now, what you will see in your packet, and, you know, cheers and determine how you want to flow with this conversation. I kind of feel like some of them kind of will be able to flow into each other, in that you have some items listed here that you all decided to prioritize at the last meeting from your previous work plan. Some have more fleshed out proposals than others. For example, the community capacity fund is attached here, a proposal on there, at least the last version of it. I do know that the diversion criteria is nearing closer and closer to being finalized, and I know the diversion subcommittee, members of that committee have been working on those items. So there are a number of things that have progressed in development, but not near full completion, if you will, to be presented to a full board.
So there was no discussion about chair oversight from this body? I thought there was.
Yeah, there was discussion about shared oversight, but when you're asking if there was a formal proposal made, there was action taken to request that an oversight board, independent oversight board be created, and in response to that from the PPC, it was to take it to the full board to have the board supervisors themselves serve that capacity, which then created the.
My understanding was that the board decided that they would be the governing body, which doesn't dictate a community oversight. It's the board, which I do see a marked improvement in some of the reporting from the sheriff around ethnicity and demographics information, but there's still the obvious racial disparities. So I think there could be more movement, and should be part of the discussion with the equity committee.
On the list so far, we have the jurors, the community capacity fund, the diversion criteria, and renewing a discussion about the sheriff's reporting and where that stands. And one other option as we have this discussion is to also move through our agenda today. And as we're discussing agenda items, folks can pipe up and nominate those for things that should go up, on the list for our September. Is there anything else right now in terms of agenda for the joint equity committee or job?
Could you read off the list again, Ellen?
Yeah, the list I had so far was the diversion criteria, the community capacity fund. Again, both of those, Patrice said there's some additional work that needs to happen, but those are items that have been actively worked on. The juror issue and the sheriff's oversight reporting conversation. Did I miss anything that was mentioned?
So in addition to that, I would recommend that everyone think about and take some time to be able to speak to the overall role and configuration of the R job, trying to use some of the language that's in objective 9 of the agenda today. There's a I don't want to step on any thunder for any announcements that may be made later. But you know, someone who used to attend these meetings used to speak a lot about you know, the concept of implementation and what that entails, and what you all are sort of, for lack of a better term, relegated toward or relegated to right now, which is not, you know, implementation as a verb so much as making further recommendations about recommendations that the RJTF already made. And so trying to figure out how to be more potentially active, or to have more of an active role in, you know, the steps that happen to move these recommendations that were comprised already into effect. And just thinking about, you know, how you know, may want to present or speak about the limitations that the R job has so far in doing that, which works fine within the context of everything that's already on the list, but also supersedes any one of those particular issues as a larger sort of structural concept that you may want to at least be heard about, and begin some thinking or some brainstorming about, especially if and I think that's why it's on the agenda. Like, if we can come up with some ideas or some ways that you'd like, you know, to have that look, if there was to be a reconfiguration, being able to float those ideas or pitch those ideas and say, well, what if we operated in this way? Or what if we had these, you know, responsibilities, or these sort of powers, or whatever you might say in that regard, you know, in order to be able to take a more active role, and not to feel like you're just sitting in meetings sort of talking about things and making recommendations that you know, may not get the type of consideration or move into action in the ways that you envision.
You, Chris, that's a really good point. Does anyone want to comment on that? Again, it's on our agenda a little later, and it sounds like the idea would be to explore that with this body a little later today, and then maybe refine any asks or requests or suggestions we have of the board as a potential reconfiguration of the group. All right, so in terms of agenda, any additional comments from the body? Gigi?
So I sit on the CEF subcommittee, and when we had the horrific incident in Antioch, I went to each department looking for funding to support the pain and address the trauma, and there wasn't any funds readily available to address that from any department. And so it says, objective says 7, reach out to the Board of Supervisors for funding to help endow, support the community fund, and identify and apply for the funding sources. I think there should be some, I want to say one time, but a pool of money to address a crisis that happens in this county, especially when it falls in the lane of racial injustice. In this case, it was the criminal acts of law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we did talk about that. You brought that up previously. I thought it was a really good suggestion. The issue sometimes with the population of folks who are in the community who get, you know, who suffer from those kinds of incidents, they don't want to be right. You know, you don't want to be right that the, you know, department is against you, or you don't want to be right that there's conspiracies. Then you confirm they are. That's traumatizing. Cause it's like, oh man, I was wishing it was just me. I was wishing I was inaccurate or I was wrong. But then it's like, you know, it's a tall mountain to climb, because now not only do you have enormous hurdles, now they're also working against you. with force. So, you do need somewhere to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm struggling internally. I call it the internal tug of war, with how you process, those kinds of, incidents. How do you move forward with confidence and hope and that sort of thing? How do you continue to move forward and have, invest in and have stock in the system that's going to work for you when you have confirmation that it's working against you? That's something that needs to be sifted out there and worked on. So I agree with that. That's something that needs to be thrown out there as to how do we provide services for folks who have been, traumatized in that way. Whether you said, like you said, one time, or services available, sign up, call in, register, do something, but availability, the best ability is availability. So having it available to the public and the communities.
Hearing what you're saying about trauma and then what Gigi's saying about that quick turnaround, right? The need to be responsive, to have an emergency fund that can act, that doesn't have to be in, that's ready to go with this incident. So we're not in like an RFP and having to go through a lengthy process when we're in the emergency. Is this something that the community engagement and funding subcommittee could make a recommendation over at our next meeting, which I think is in August, so that we can act on that and have something maybe a little more specific, have a specific recommendation for equity?
Yes. Yes.
Anybody else on the body have a comment about that piece going to the CPF? Oh, Chris, yeah.
I think that was my cue. I'm curious on that one if among the many things that the ORESJ is tasked with, like if this is part of that, like if that is something that's already been considered, or there's already supposed to be a part of a fund for the office that would do this sort of thing, because I'm fine with the recommendation. I think it makes a lot of sense for there to be, a fund for such responses somewhere. Wouldn't want to make that recommendation and get it all the way to the point of formal submission or review, only to hear, well, this is something that the ORESJ is going to do.
Is the question, Chris, is ORSJ already tasked with or planning to have an emergency pot of funds that's readily available to address crises that occur? No.
It's correct.
Yes, no, the answer is no, we don't have that.
Okay.
set up.
Yes, that. Can I just add something? Can I just say, we do have this one-time fund that we're, with the same idea, community healing, like mini grants. But we'd like to come to that. We'll be at the next, CEF, subcommittee meeting because, to have an ongoing funding source. Right now, we're just funded to cover staff, but to have an ongoing funding source could be one of the ideas if the subcommittee also agrees. So we'll be there to talk through the details and see what the subcommittee thinks.
Although just to add though, that funding that Kendra just mentioned will ultimately be like a mini grant program for folks to deliver healing support services program. But I think what Gigi's talking about is a little bit different. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Gigi. It's something that's, again, a lot more nimble and fast, immediately available, something that doesn't necessarily have to go through a competitive process, but it's more like addressing the need as it occurs in real time. And that's a different mechanism of distribution of funds. So I don't want to conflate the two. And I guess to your point, Chris, we want to make that distinction so that the board doesn't point to what we are trying to run as being the answer to what Gigi's raising, because I think that's two separate things. Does that make sense?
That's helpful, thank you.
So we would have to create it, correct?
I think even having a generalized proposal by September would be a really good goal. Because I imagine it's something that, they're gonna wanna wait on. But I think, thinking about, and Gigi, from you and from the community, the other community members that have been impacted, maybe even thinking about a couple of scenarios, like what would have helped, right? If we were ready to go in April of 2023, the way we should have been, what would have helped? What would have been those asks, I think, to really put a face on.
I have a question. First, because I know you were involved in the latest sort of development, if you will, around the community capacity fund. Could this piece fit within that sort of scope? Reason why I ask is because in some ways it is kind of building capacity for community to be able to have access to resources that are readily available to then respond in a more immediate fashion. Just curious if there's a way that we can, if one can be integrated within the other, or if that's too distinct, if both items are too distinct of each other.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it depends on, so you're bringing the lawyer in me out, and that I don't know that that's ever a good thing, but it depends on, what was that?
There are a lot of lawyers in here.
Yeah, and they will relate to. I don't know if it's a good thing, but it depends on, I guess, the reading of that recommendation from the RJTF, right? Because the recommendation in full singles out, well, I don't want to say singles out, but calls out quite clearly reentry, as well as I think we've already kind of expanded among reentry funds and organizations, also potential referral sites, right? So community-based organizations that are providing or meeting programmatic and service needs in such a way that the point of that fund is to build communities' capacity to respond to things that happen in the community, such that the justice system is a last resort, or is not deployed at all if possible, right? And so I think this can be sort of expansively read into that, but wanting to make sure that one of those concepts doesn't get funded at the expense of the other is important as well.
Yeah, I thought I heard, and I don't know where the pocket of funds are that you're speaking of, Patrice.
The development of the community.
But it wouldn't be in my lens around reentry funds. I'm trying as much as I can to keep people from never having to come back out of a place they should never be. So I'm just thinking of a community response that would be multi-generational for the people who are most harmed by the incidents that happen. That you would do community healing, but not, for anyone. I mean, I think anyone who lived in those cities should have the opportunity to come to a space of healing, no matter what their ethnic or cultural background is, and know that the county has heard the pain and then is doing something immediately, as we do with, when we have hot days, we open up the shelters, the cooling spots right away. They get open, get an email saying, if you're a senior and you don't have air conditioning, you can come to this spot to be cooled down. We should have spaces in our county when there's something that has caused people to have an enhanced level of fear or less of belonging, to come and hear that you do matter.
Yeah, and I understood what you were suggesting there. I guess I was wanting to explore, since this is a possibility to develop a model that you want to see come to fruition in both regards. that can then be packaged to present to, the equity committee or to the full board. Kind of a 2-for-1 type of deal. So,
All right, well, it looks like we have our work cut out for us on agenda creation for our September joint meeting. Is there anything else that folks want to add on this item before we move on, either from the body or from the chat? Public comment on this. Anyone in the room or on the Zoom, I'm assuming. Oh, there we go, Peter. Yeah.
So this is kind of related, but as we talk about this body tasked with creating some kind of capacity building effort or fund. Now the potential of also having fund available for crises. And you have our office also having a small pot of capacity building funds that they're proposing. We have Measure X having just allocated $1 million to East and Central County to also have capacity building for community organizations in those parts of the county. And then probation has also released already in probation capacity building. I'm wondering what kind of conversation should we be talking about so that we're actually aligning these efforts, we're not kind of operating separately or in silos, so that we're in alignment, we're leveraging each other's resources so that we're limiting redundancy, filling gaps where one fund can't fund something, maybe another fund can, that's still a phase of development and speaking that way. But I guess, and I'm thinking of to Chris's point, is like, but also being clear and organized and coordinated so that decision makers can't say, oh, we're already doing that. And that's happening over here. And therefore, you know, I'm casting out an effort because they're pointing to another part of funds when really they're different and we should become collectively putting it together. That's just something to put out there. Steve.
Thank you, because another thing we talked about in the CEF meeting was, what does if you're doing capacity building, what does the RFP speak to? One of the challenges that are often recognized immediately is that we do not create a space for new providers to come in charge of must have worked with the county for 3 years. And even when building capacity, you have to prove that you're capable of doing the work. So I'm hoping that in somebody, maybe not this one, somebody at the county level, we're looking at inclusion. I shared at an earlier meeting that many of us was excited. The department released community defined innovation grant, but I'm hearing from some of the providers that don't have contract, therefore didn't have funding. They're not even able to get started yet because, of course, we have a reimbursement system in this county. And when you have to reimburse, that means that you put yourself in trouble with the Department of Labor, asking people to do work, but not being able to pay them within the time allotment you must. So many are just, you know, waiting to get started, which puts them at a disadvantage from getting the work done. But also you have to think about the people who don't apply, who are doing great work, that are culturally responsive, reflective of the communities, but they, from the very onset, don't qualify. So I'm hoping our RFPs in this county, as part of the work you guys are doing, you get a look to see how do we build capacity and create a fair system of care that, you know, embraces the wisdom of people who were generally not at the table.
That's a really big point. How do you bring in the people that are the usual folks that are coming to the table that would be very reflective of the community? I'm thinking that at the CEF meeting, would it be possible to have or ESJ even just do a 1 or 2 pager grid of what are those current, you had a great list of the different pieces that are aligning that maybe cover some of this and maybe don't, but I think maybe that committee looking at what is currently happening so that we can see what is our job vision and really design something that's very specific.
I think our office is happy to work with Patrice's team to get that out and provide that. And if there's anything that we don't know about that you guys are aware of, please share.
Alex. Hey.
When is that?
Oh, no, I was just gonna mention, are you familiar with the Strong Fund, Peter? East County, the Strong Fund Collaborative? The Strong Fund
Strong
Collaborative,
point of collaborative.
you sent over, do you know about that?
Yes, yeah, we talked.
Okay,
yeah, we
great. I
talked.
just spoke to the director from Mawash on Tuesday. And she was asking like what some of the needs are, so I was just talking about a lot of the stuff we talked about here. Housing building, we pointed to African American Wellness Hub. They were talking about the funding sources and said now, so that's another resource. I think there's about 8 funders now that are attached. They start off with 4.
Right, I'm gonna move us to our next agenda item, which is to discuss objective 3 from the Our Job Work Plan, and if folks can look at page 7 onwards, objective 3 is on page 8.
Yeah, so actually items, agenda items 5 through 8 are all of the objectives that during the last quarterly meeting, you all wanted to discuss prioritizing. And as I stated earlier, some of these items have had some movement and development in regards to those objectives. Others may need to be fleshed out a little further. So for objective 3, and your work plan needs to discuss, to provide resources to incentivize or provide schools with non-punitive discipline practices such as PBIS, restorative justice, as well as behavioral health and early intervention services for youth. Some of the activities aligned with that would be identifying funding to provide resources to schools which are implementing or expanding non-punitive discipline practices, apply for identified funding sources as approved by the Board of Supervisors, and identify and agree upon schools and programs to be funded. And so in previous months, if you will, I know that there's a lot of conversation that came out of the diversion committee about some of the work that was taking place, mostly in West Contra Costa around some of this work here. But also generally speaking, there's been a lot of movement overall in multiple districts and school sites and even for ourselves with allocation from the Measure X funding to establish a restorative justice initiative. There's a lot of movement happening in that space. And so this is an opportunity for the body to deliberate on that a little bit more to given the evolution of work up to this point, where would this body like to dedicate its energy and its focus with regard to that specific chapter?
I'm just wondering if it'd be helpful to the body. I think I've asked this before, just to presentation about kind of the state of the schools. And I know that one of the plans that was just completed by the districts is a plan where they have to identify some of the restorative practices, right? It was developed as a countywide plan. I think it was due March 1st, I think. So it's very fresh. And I wonder just to hear kind of some of the data and stats around that work and all the various RJ work that's going on in the schools. And you already have in some other meeting that. Just offering.
I think
Just offering.
I think a baseline of where we are.
Yeah.
Gigi?
Is there a both ends approach to restorative justice? Because I've been spending quite a bit of time in school districts where the kid is being empowered to speak up for themselves, wind up being the kid on the naughty list. And it's a lot of bias from school teachers and principals at the school. So are we doing the work just with the lens of the kid having got on the naughty list, or are we also doing some work with the administrators in the System that continually harm some children.
So we could get a baseline of the training's being done and bias for the adults. So a lot of the training that we can control at our level is the training for adults. And then we could see the gaps and where it's incomplete.
I'm dealing with ear pain, so that's why, right, but you guys can hear me, right? Sounds so weird when I'm so one of the things that we've been, talking about in our school districts in the West Contra Costa, is that, yes, we do restorative justice practices in schools. To your point, I think the fidelity of restorative justice in schools should really be the focus of kind of what folks look at, because you can be trained all you want, right? But it's really about how that training then is impacting your practice.
Yeah.
So administrators, teachers, school officials, and then how are those practices that we want to implement, how are those reflected in our policies, right? And so I think it is a both and approach. And I think one of the things that we found is like after folks are trained and say restorative justice doesn't go right in the schools, then that teacher or that administrator may say, right, I don't want to hear anything, RJ, right? So how do we continue to build upon, especially with the work of the county? Like, how is this like a comprehensive approach so that whatever we're doing countywide is really embedded in our schools where we get deep training, right? And it's not just a one-off or the single approach, but it's really authentic and restorative practices and restorative justice training. And it doesn't end with just the one time, right? So it has to be embedded in your system and it has to be in your policies in order, in my opinion, to really be impactful. And then I was just looking at this, I think one of the, I love Matthew's suggestion of like kind of giving the state of the schools, because one of the things I see is mental health in our schools is super important still. And for a lot of schools, we don't have a base level of mental health support, right? And we refer students to the same resources that are already overwhelmed, right? It's so if we have students who need services, we're referring them to community-based organizations that have wait lists or that are not readily accessible. So like, how do we shift thinking and shift funds? And SB HIP is a new grant that we got a part of a countywide initiative to bring more mental health services in schools. So like, how do we like collectively come together, like identify where those resources are going and how they're getting to the students who need them. At a $50,000 wellness in schools program grant that I was all excited about. And then I was told that in order for us to keep it, we needed to create NAMI on campus clubs. NAMI on campus clubs are the type of club that high achievers usually join to strengthen their resume and college applications. And I thought the work we'd be doing would be with the kids that are most at risk who have IEPs. So we lost the grant because we didn't create these cookie cutter high achieving groups. And that was so frustrating to me. We continue to do the work without the funding, but our End in the Silence program and our approaches to identifying young people that are struggling with, speak to trying to keep them out of a school to prison pipeline, not the ones that have the time to join a club. So at the state level, we just completely fouled that up. And then I'll say with Prop 1, which is also taking the prevention dollars out of the county, role into the school role. School is not a safe place for all students. That's where some of the deepest hurts and harms are done. So I think we really need to be looking at ways that we can, meet the kids where they're at and where they feel safe. a lot of time for kids from BIPOC communities. It's gonna be natural resources like faith centers, youth centers, et cetera. So I'll be so glad when we get these youth centers up and going, because sometimes the after-school programs are where kids find hope.
I think for next steps, it sounds like bringing Lynn in and any other appropriate folks to give kind of a state of the school, so we can kind of see here what the existing status is, and maybe try to quantify those needs that would align most with this group and with our mission of really addressing racism and racial harms. And so where is that intersection of need? So working on this, or is the idea that maybe bring that up at our next meetings to have? But I mean, I think it'd be a good thing for the folks to figure.
I agree. And I think whatever the body wishes to, receive the information and unpack the conversations that largely been held in the diversion subcommittee, but, whichever you guys feel is best.
I think it should come to the whole group.
Yeah, and isn't there a diversion committee meeting coming up? Maybe it can be discussed like that.
Right, maybe we can do some
Questions,
planning
so you
there.
can really
Yeah.
plan it there, and then.
That's a good idea, Lynn. So the diversion subcommittee will work on a little more strategic planning to get this back in front of the whole group and just try to figure out exactly how we want to focus. Any additional thoughts or comments from our job member? And then any public comment on this agenda item before we move on to the next related item? So next, item 6, we're going to talk about the Community Capacity Fund. Again, same attachment, but Teresa pointed us to, and if you can tab ahead to pages 14 and 15. Next sheet.
So actually, I'll kind of tag, Chris on this one, since I know he did a lot of work on this, so you can maybe fill folks in terms of the context of how this latest, proposal is put together.
So essentially, this fund came together because this was originally, I would say this recommendation was pretty high on the list of priorities for the CEF. There's a reason it's named the way that it's named, right? Community engagement and funding. And so with one of its tasks literally being to develop a fund to build community capacity to, again, be responsive in reentry, as well as, various other points throughout the trajectory one may take through the system, programmatically, or, with service needs, just wanting to make sure that that community-based organizations and their capacity to respond to needs is built, so that there are options that exist and continue to exist for people to leave the system and still get services, get their needs met, get whatever sort of programming may help them to either be diverted or to re-enter after incarceration, and hopefully to avoid systems involvement altogether. Right, we knew that was important, and a great recommendation by the RJTF. Wanted to stand that up. Had a couple of meetings with Jewel Legacy Group, where they outlined a very similar process that they underwent here in Alameda County some years prior. And it is with that information that a lot of this came together, particularly this idea that there will be two levels to it. You know, that some community-based organizations would just receive, you know, relatively small investments. And then others would receive much larger investments, but along with the investment, you know, some programming to literally help to build sustainable community-based organizations. How do you stand up your nonprofit organization? How do you staff it? What's your model? You know, how do you fundraise? All of these, you know, very sort of practical things that anyone is going to need to know if you're going to develop, you know, a community-based response to use in place of a carceral system, right? So, you know, basically, with that in mind, and also wanting to outline who what sorts of organizations the fund would be for, as directly as possible, you know, wanted to move that fund forward. And so what you see here is basically, you know, a lot of that thinking laid out. And what we did with this was, you know, a much earlier recommendation to, yeah, it would have been to the PPC at that time, was to fund a technical assistance provider that could actually stand this program up. If there's going to be a program that, given these guidelines, is going to host a submission, an application process, and, you know, is going to administer funds based on who gets in and who does not, provide the training that's going to come with, you know, the folks who get the larger investment. What we know is that that's not going to be our job directly, because all of you generally have things to do from 9 to 5 that, you know, you're responsible for, and this would be a large undertaking that a group like this couldn't handle, and so needed a technical assistance provider who could actually do it. And so that was essentially the ask, right? It wasn't even to move the fund itself, or like, hey, these are our guidelines, now fund it all together. It was like, we need someone who can actually build this out, or who can actually deliver the programming and administer the process that it's going to take to do this, to build this, to stand this up. And we know it's not us. And essentially the response was, you know, that we lacked enough of a robust proposal and enough substance to move forward at that time, right? So that kind of left us to kind of figure out how to pivot, or how to respond, or how to you know, rebound from that, and regroup as necessary to move it forward again. What I personally would like to see is an additional meeting, if possible, with Jewel Legacy Group, just to get a sense of what the proposal language has been in other places that they've worked. If we could maybe, you know, utilize some of that in order to inform the proposal that we develop. But again, I mean, it felt a little dubious, because again, I feel like this group understands, you know, essentially what it wants to do, and laid it out in, you know, the best and also most concise terms that it could, but needs help to stand this up and to iron out all of the details in the first place, which is why we wanted a technical assistance provider. So again, for me, I think, you know, a next step might be to bring Jewel Legacy Group back, and to see if we could get some language based on proposals that they've worked on in the past, or responded to in the past, to help move that forward. Because all we want to do at this point is have a TA provider who can actually sort of say what this should be, how it should roll out, and how it operates, and to stand it up.
So would the understanding then be that Jewel would not be interested in competing if we put out an RFP? Because if we're using any language in their proposal, then they would not at all be eligible to compete or provide any technical assistance to somebody who's bidding.
That makes it difficult. I don't know. What I do know is, I mean, I definitely can't speak for them, having not met with them up to this point, about whether or not it would be something that they felt like they had capacity to do or wanted to be involved in. Also depending on probably other details like the budget of, such a contract or proposal, if it were to exist at some point in the future. All details that just don't currently, we don't currently know. I think additionally, what we could attempt to do, in light of that point, which I have been thinking about, I just, up to now hadn't thought of another way to get at this, because we were already so informed by the work that they've done. Just seemed a logical place to go back to. But I think additionally, what we could do is, do some research on, or try to find, without their help, the sorts of proposal language that has been used for, say, a community capacity fund in Alameda County, and other neighboring counties, if not Contra Costa County at some point in the past, and to utilize that language to make a more robust proposal, or to round out the language that is here, in such a way that it might be more acceptable, and more actionable, a proposal or a recommendation to the equity committee / the board. And I would also point out that there wasn't any, and this goes back to this overall sort of question that is part of the theme of today's meeting. We didn't get a lot of like direct feedback about sort of what was missing or what was needed. And I think if you all were in a direct meeting with supervisors, either as a subcommittee or the full board, about something like this, where that meeting was, an agreed upon joint meeting space, I think you could get a lot better and more detailed feedback, than what we got, which was at, it was at a year-end report, presentation, much like the one that happened in April, but like a few months prior, right? I mean, not months, years, a few years ago. And so it was just kind of, I am literally just saying this is something that has been recommended, without going into much detail. And that was sort of the response. And so I think, the more that you guys are able to have the direct dialogue, the better we know what we're looking for or what to shoot for. In the meantime, it's on us, I suppose, to do more research and try to build out a more substantive proposal.
Does this in some ways align in terms of our need to look at the existing lay of the land of what exists in Contra Costa and what the needs are and what aligns with our job, to the suggestion Gigi made earlier about the sort of quick response, community drama fund? I'm sure she's gonna have a catchier name than that, that we're envisioning. Does it make sense to kind of study this in some ways together with that, and together with the existing landscape, so that we can identify those gaps and where those line up in this, again, in the CEF, which I know has been working on it.
First of all, did you say drama fund? Like, is that what I heard?
Did I say what?
Drama fund? That's what it sounded like. I heard you say.
Trauma.
Trauma.
TRA.
Okay.
Sorry.
I was like, well, what?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that's a different name still.
The only drama is that Jill wanted to make a quick comment first.
If I could just sort of clarify the question that came up on this. It's a great overview,
just not much detail. And it talks about reentry, but it doesn't talk about what should be funded. And I think that was the question. It wasn't that this shouldn't be funded. It was just like, what exactly are we, I mean, where are the gaps? Like anybody who's involved in reentry, we all, you know, have gone through the GAP process. We know where the gaps are. So rather than just funding something, I think they were looking for what should be specific. Where are the gaps that relate to racial disparity, right? And then part of the challenge that this group has been with data, because we don't have data from all the different criminal justice entities. So that sort of could unfold as to where the gaps are and where the greatest racial disparity fall within, because it's not just the sheriff, right? It starts way
All the LEAs.
You all know that. So I think that this is a great overview, just not a whole lot of meat for them to say, yes, you should have done that. What do you think? Yes, for the reentry population. Okay. I mean, you and I can sit down in 5 minutes, think of 15 different areas that could apply to. You can't apply to all 15, it would be that amount of funding. So what area with reentry aligns with the work this group is doing?
Right, that's our thought to that. And this is, I think, something that we're also engaged in this conversation and thinking too is, in addition to looking at areas of need, it may even help to think one step further, think of what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And how those outcomes relate directly to the mandate of this group. So if we can then be more focused on thinking of outcomes, that'll help us to think about what specific resources, services, programming can help us get to those outcomes and help refine our thinking.
Anybody else on the oversight body have a comment? We have a good direction on our next step in terms of additional development at EEF. Yeah. Any public comment or any additional?
I think if CEF is looking at this, they are going to work for that because they did a super deep dive with their surveys of both their CEOs and the incarcerated population to determine where those needs are, and they did a very comprehensive report.
Also, in the land and an investment on prevention versus 1% is already.
The CAB's work and looking at the lens of starting upstream.
And just so you know, it may just be reworded, but it specifically says for individuals involved in the criminal and juvenile justice system in Contra Costa. So this actually was not aimed at prevention. So we think that's something that the group feels it should be redirected to. I think that should be a discussion at CPF as well.
I'm saying, yeah, reentry still can be classified as facilities. That's all.
And I think Gigi had her hand up for me, so go ahead.
No, I just keep going back to the keeping them out versus and even involved.
For sure, it's just the language in this document.
Yeah.
You might wanna-
And that's document from Jewel Legacy.
This is what was presented to from this group of community capacity. So I'm not sure for all of this.
And I would also encourage CEF or this body to reach out to some of the surrounding jurisdictions to see what sort of success they had from their capacity building efforts, as I just did. Because we don't want to replicate something that didn't work as well as perhaps it sounded like it would have at the moment. So just, we don't want to invest in something that isn't now producing the outcomes that were intended at the time.
Do you have any, do you know of any counties? that-
I sure do.
Okay.
Yeah, so Alameda County said they did not see the significant improvement that they thought they would. Really, it's the same providers applying for contracts, with the exception of one provider has kind of expanded their services as a result of the TA that they got through the capacity building effort. But otherwise, it didn't have the impact that they thought it would on some of the smaller, more grassroots organizations to allow them to grow, despite those organizations participating in the full tiered approach, working very close with Jewel Legacy. We're 5 years past that effort now. Goodness, 6, 7 years past that effort now, and they're still just seeing applications on RFPs from kind of the heavy hitters, right? So it didn't really do what they intended it to do with respect to growing capacity overall, with the exception of.
And that speaks to the language that needs to be in an RFP in order to get the grassroots community approach of that. Anecdotally, because they don't spend money on proving themselves, you see evidence of it. Like today is the anniversary for DRL, These Runs in Life, which is a really, grassroots effort that no one would have thought would have stuck around for 20 years, just like rap music,
Yeah, in the capacity building language, a lot of times it almost kind of, detours you, right? You assume, oh, it's existing. So existing CBOs and agencies, so you automatically just stop reading almost. I notice when I look at it a lot of times, it kind of gears towards that when you see the capacity building language. So I think finding a way to encourage as opposed to discourage those who may exclude themselves through reading and assuming that this is for existing agencies, finding some kind of language somehow to include or say, hey, not only for existing agencies, but new agencies as well, or something like that. Something. I'm not a grant writer, RFP designer, but something of that nature.
I can add something, as a person that, gets approached a lot by, up and coming organizations that are looking for, some support, some funding, to get their, either their organization off the ground, in order to expand their projects. What I have seen and have noticed is that there's probably a great need for more education and educational workshops for a lot of these new founders, to support them in managing their expectations of what it takes to be engaged in the county process. We've managed through probation in our partnership with the Antioch Community Foundation to establish a Youth of Promise Fund to allow for micro grants, particularly for organizations that are serving young people who are at risk of being involved in the justice system out in East County. And what we found from that in doing so was that now we were able to tap into a pool of organizations that would have ordinarily not come across our radar, to now give them a platform, so to speak, to compete for future RFPs. That said, we also along the way expressed what our expectations were and our standards were as a department for going into contract with providers. So I think that level of transparency that we were sharing with those organizations gave them the opportunity to rate themselves for what was coming down the pipeline. So there's a fine balance, because the process to compete in RFP procurement process with the county, and I'm sure I can speak for many different departments, is that it's not going to get any easier. There are certain things we can simplify. there are certain things that can be done to express what the intentions are with investing resources in specific communities to serve certain target populations, building the kind of model you're looking for, all of that. With that said, there is a level of scrutiny that providers are going to have to come to, because we're also having to be accountable for these public dollars. And so I have gotten approached many, many times by organizations who've been with great intentions and great ideas. They just don't have a complete sense of what it is they're actually going to get into when they decide that they want to compete for a contract. And so, so I say all that to say that, yes, there is some quote unquote bureaucracy or red tape that's involved in the process, but there's an intended purpose for that, because you also don't want to fund things that don't work, bad apples, folks who are just not at the level of either quality or capacity, can end up doing more harm than good. So we have to balance that reality with also the reality of there's some really great grassroots groups that have been doing some awesome work for a long time, and they deserve an opportunity. So with that, I think the need for more trainings, the more education that's put out there of what to anticipate and to expect when you are going after these dollars, how to best partner with other organizations as an opportunity to start to build up your own, not only professional reputation within that community and in partnership with other organizations, but then also help to level up your organizational capacity, right? So supporting subcontracting or supporting joint applications, things
But
of
a
that.
fiscal sponsor.
Yeah,
a fiscal
exactly.
agent might look like.
So, but, you know,
Right.
you won't know this if you're thinking, you know, I'm gonna do some great work and I've been serving, you know, this block for so long, paying out of my pocket, you know, running a transitional house on my own, and I want to see a new, you know, I want to expand in that regard. There's just a lot of educating that needs to take place, because it can be a very dangerous thing if you just need to put dollars out there so smaller organizations can get a hold of it, and they're not prepared. They're not prepared to deliver. That's probably even more damaging down the road.
But the scoring could encourage partnerships, collaborations.
Yeah.
And there's the smaller organizations bring something that positions the larger ones to have more to them as well, because they're often are larger, they have the skill set, they're working with the county. But if your scoring doesn't support working with a smaller organization and you can move forward without it, you're losing all that magic that happens at grassroots. So I also look at the scoring matrix and feel like the county can do a better job to encourage partnerships, because that's where the mentoring at NAMI, we've been fiscal agents for several small organizations that now bring in funds, sometimes compete against, then I don't get it, they get it. But as long as they're working towards the same goal, it's okay.
Any other comments? Any public comment? All right, I'm gonna move us to item 7.
You're not gonna lose more when I step out, right? I have to step out and do something.
No.
Okay.
Good,
Whatever. No.
So, enough. I just-
Ratio. Before those days, stay here to the meeting.
The jury pooling process.
And just as a quick reminder, folks, I know, if you don't mind, please be sure to elevate your voices so that the folks online can hear you clearly in our recording just after you as well. Thank you.
And if you look at objective 8 in the work plan, this goes all the way back to the racial justice task force. And one of their objectives, and consequently our objective, is to encourage the Superior Court to return to the process of jury selection, whereby jurors are called to service to their local branch for, and this says misdemeanor trials, but I would broaden that to all trials, as well as generally equitable jury selection and inclusion. And
I can give a little bit of context and then I'll tag it back to you. This is, I think you mentioned that this was one of the objectives under the work plan. Yeah, Executive 8 encourages the senior court to return to the process of jury selection. So at your last quarterly meeting, this was another item that you all discussed about prioritizing moving forward on this objective for this upcoming year. Ellen did share that there was some engagement between her office and also the Superior Court regarding this particular piece. She also shared that during the budget hearing, I believe, well, I guess you can speak a little bit more to the comments that you gave, but there was certainly a response back from Supervisor Joy and wanting to work with the Residential Oversight Body in this particular year. So there just appears to be some movement around this work and on a number of different fronts. You also have flyer of upcoming event and then speaking to some of issues around lack of diversity in terms of the jury pool across the country. And so we have some of our local leaders, some of whom are on the table today, who will be engaging in a panel discussion around this. So wanted to bring this back to our job body to see where and in what ways do you all want to ensure that there's some movement on this, if there's a need for clarifying what action should take place, what ask or recommendation you want to lift up to.
This is very topical, as Gigi mentioned, the issue in Alameda County that came up, a review of a number of older death penalty cases where juror notes had been discovered that a prosecutor was excluding potential jurors based on their religion and based on their race. And we see overwhelmingly white jury pools here in Contra Costa. Last time, I think I spent a lot of time. I'm happy to kind of go through that again, but you know, what happens if someone's got a jury trial, you know, a case from Richmond, they may be pulling jurors, the court may pull jurors from the entire county so that you have folks in Brentwood getting a notice to go to Richmond and vice versa, people in the other side of the county getting a notice to go out to Pittsburgh. That was not the way it always was in Contra Costa. This change was in 2011 and our office has been urging the court to return to local regionalized jury pooling for some time now. And interestingly, the court has made a shift towards more regionalized pooling of cases through direct assignment, where even it used to be the felony case would maybe start out in Pittsburgh, but would always come downtown to Martinez. But the court has shifted that, and some felony cases would stay out in the branch courts in a system that's called direct assignment or direct calendaring. But despite that, the court has not been receptive to switching back for jurors, and for so many reasons. It's critical. It's critical to our clients and to folks that are accused of crimes going through the system who are predominantly Black and brown, that they have juries that can be more diverse in all of the ways. It's diverse in terms of their race, diverse in terms of folks that work in a variety of sectors and maybe aren't just retired and aren't just sort of wealthy enough to be able to do a long trial without being paid. So you'll see the letter that was included in the packet today was a letter that my office authored asking the court wanted to, last year, they have what they do local rules every year, and they wanted to make this a enshrine as a local rule what they've been doing of drawing the countywide jury pools. My office objected. We wrote this letter and explained why we think it is a practice that, you know, it furthers institutionalized racism. It puts community members at a huge disadvantage. I mean, it's bad for the environment. There are all these problems with it. And really what it results in as you go in our courts day in and day out is, you know, folks from only certain regions of the county and only certain demographics are sitting in judgment of many folks with whom they don't have a lot of shared life experience. And I think every community member, it's a wonderful experience to be on a jury. And I think part of what this group could do is really lift up how important it is for people to want to show up for jury duty and to want to sit. But I think it's really critical, even more critical than it was at the time of the racial justice task force, because the court has really spoken out and said, no, we're enshrining this. And we didn't include it in the packet, but the court wrote me back from this letter, and I will read you their response. And there's a bunch of different issues in here, but I'm just going to read you the response about jury selection. The public defender opposed local rule 2.1, which would formalize the county-wide for jury selection. The public defender supports selecting juries from those communities adjacent to the courthouse where a matter is to be heard. When the public defender believes it would result in juries that are better representative of the branch court community. And then they cite a code of civil procedure, which is 197 sub A, requires the source list for master and qualified jury lists come from a representative cross section of the population of the area served by the court. After previous consideration, the court determined a county-wide jury selection best met this statutory requirement. At this time, the court will not be changing its jury selection protocol, but is only formalizing it into the local rule. So they were not interested in making the changes we were advocating for, as is obvious. And again, I think this is especially critical when we're representing an African American or a Latino client, but it's really critical for everybody that comes through our office. Gigi?
So this will be one of the items that we'll take to the equity.
Yeah, and it was a good discussion at budget because, you know, this was very topical and I was asked about it, and you know, the board sort of said, oh, well, we don't have issues like this in Contra Costa. I said we have a lot of issues around a number of things to do with jurors and to do with the fairness of who stays on juries and who gets kicked off, and to do with who makes it into the room at all. And so the board did seem very open. I could see, you know, it seemed like, I know Supervisor Carlson had previously been engaged in law enforcement, and I see him kind of nodding that he remembered a time when Pittsburgh people went to Pittsburgh, and all of them seemed to respond when I said, I bet your constituents find this really frustrating, because when I'm out in the community, people keep saying, well, why am I being called to a jury in named community that's very far from them? So it is very topical. And I think it's an important thing for us to push forward. And I wanted to add a sub part B onto this discussion, which is, you know, what can we do about supporting more diverse jurors and supporting folks who cannot afford to be on juries? And so I would like to suggest that we study the pilot program that they had in San Francisco, which was called Be the Jury, which funded folks to go to jury duty who qualified. And I'll give you just a 1 or 2 minute version. I just pulled their report today. This program is called Be the Jury. They actually had to go get they had an assembly bill which authorized it. So we would potentially have to get legislative authorization. We'd have to get county funding. But what they did is they looked at folks that were in certain income brackets to see if they qualified. And if they did, and you guys probably know jurors get paid a whopping $15 a day, right? And so, you know, the number one thing, even if folks make it into the room, is they say like, I can't afford to be here. You know, my employer pays 1 or 2 days and I can't either sit on this case at all. But this raised the stipend from $15 a day to $100 a day for low to moderate income San Franciscans. They implemented this over a period of time. They had a lot of folks that said they would never have been able to serve as a juror, but for that funding, and were able to really diversify the jury pools and have people serving on juries that otherwise would not have been eligible. So I think studying an approach like this and seeing if this is something that our job would recommend the county fund a pilot of would be great. My understanding is the legislation behind this, I think Gavin Newsom did veto, right, having a more established pilot. And I believe though that was based on the state's budgetary situation, but I would advocate to take a local approach. Let's bring some more light to this and get some more data by a Contra Costa pilot. And I think having additional counties that were pushing this would allow for a statewide approach to have some more diversity. And one of the other pieces of legislation that's been really great is folks that previously had a felony can now sit on our jury pool. So there's been a lot of progress over the last years in looking at who our jurors are.
Add on to that, so this pilot program that was done in City and County of San Francisco is is touched upon in this short documentary film that we're gonna be screening. I'm correct, I may be incorrect, but I believe that to get that off the ground, in addition to needing the legislation to kind of prove it, first have to get private dollars. I don't know if the city actually funded it.
They got a grant, but I don't know that, I mean, I think it would be worth requesting public funding or grant funding either.
Well, I think ultimately we want this to be
Yeah.
publicly funded
Yeah.
so it can be sustained.
Yeah.
But if, and this is something I want to introduce,
Yeah.
talking about capacity building, if get things moving with the county to urge them to move ahead with these things is to pilot something with private dollars, then I'm very open that Kendra and I were at a funders forum meeting this morning, trying to build a relationship with
Yeah.
philanthropy, so they can maybe invest in these things, pilot and serve as a model. In San Francisco, I think the overall investment for that pilot program wasn't a lot, like under $150,000. And so just as putting that out there, that I think collectively, if we look at philanthropy and as a partner to leverage to help us model things like this, so then we have test cases, proof of concept that we present to decision makers to then carry forward. That's an idea.
Otherwise, we're gonna have to redefine peer, that you are to get judged by a group of your peers. And I've never been in a court setting where I looked at the defendant and identified the people making the decisions about the sentencing as their peers, because there's such a vast difference in how they represent it. I'm just gonna be transparent. I was even shocked when I looked at the grand jury and that we have appointed here, and they were not reflective of the community, and they make high levels of decisions as well. So we can put policies in place as much as we want to, but we know culture is policy every day. This is a culture here that we should be able to shift after we've said that racism is a public health crisis. Then public should be positioned to support families for community protection.
I would say the grand jury is similar, that you're asking folks from the community to take a year off and spend, a substantial part of your workday, work week in this activity, and there's no funding. So you're really only going to garner folks that have a certain level of privilege, if that's the entry. So,
Can I ask a question? And I had some individuals who went through your program, that community, I don't know if it's not a jury, but examining things that happen in their neighborhood. So through it, and it seemed like a great model for us.
You're talking about the neighborhood restorative?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really designed, it's a diversion program.
Right.
Pre-filing for low-level nonviolent cases, so it
Yeah.
really address.
But if there's a way to model something like that in an educational way for individuals, because people are, it's foreign to some people what it's entailed the jury. So I think your course kind of gave some insights as to what it might be like.
Or we had started.
Made it more like I want to be involved in this process. Because many people from my community ignore the notices and then they get a blue card. Oh, but I know about that. That says this is the second time you've ignored.
So something about the film that caught my eye was kind of speaking to me. I'm the same way. I get that little summons thing. Most of the first thing is like, how do I get out of this?
Right.
That's the honest truth. But in this film, you have a public defender, Brenda Woods from Alameda County, talking to a classroom of high school students. And he frames it like this. He goes, we have a lot of momentum, a lot of movement and interest in being advocates and speaking out against injustice when we're out of protests or we're out in different spaces of activism. But being a juror is one of the most profound ways that you can actually impact another person's life with the amount of justice. I think it is an opportunity that we all have as citizens. So kind of take advantage of that opportunity, is actually being a very proactive participant in our justice system in meaningful ways. And that, I think, switched to a switch and flipped a switch and a light bulb that a lot of these other people's mind. You ask the class apples, so how many people now might be interested in being a juror if you could? And then a lot of young people raise their hands. This was a high school in Oakland. So I think it's reframing jury participation in that way can also help in education and also motivate folks to want to participate.
Yeah, I was gonna comment, I was gonna say, piggybacking on what you just said is that, that's the issue. That's probably the only positive most people see it. So then you outweigh that with cost and this and that and the other, then it becomes negative, right? So if you can balance that and get, bring it to a more manageable level for folks, they probably will feel more that they'll see more positives in it because it won't be so much of a hardship. And why is it a hardship to serve my community? It becomes a hardship. It's literally a hardship. So it shouldn't be that way. You shouldn't be worried about you paying for or it costing you in some kind of weird way with your job, this or that, because you're trying to serve the community. It's a dual role that you have as a citizen of a county. And if you can't serve one in that capacity, it makes it a moot point. And you have either a restricted pool or you have people who don't look at juries positive. So, and then, here I am, to say you own a home, you're a taxpayer already. Now you want me to pay for this and I just want to come and serve? I'm just serving. Why is serving costing us? That's kind of like the basic things in life that are contradictory to how you're supposed to be such a patriot. But it's always a hardship. It's always got to cost you, or you got to beg your job, or you got to use your vacation, or your sick time, or your money, or you already, probably spread pretty thin. So it shouldn't be that way, but it is. So now you have to deal with the outcome of what it is. So for regular folks or layman folks, it don't become worth it. You kind of talk yourself back out of it. So as a community, we should be trying to figure out how to give that a more positive spin than what we have existing now. So I agree with you. If, more people would raise their hand too and look at it more favorably if it wasn't such a hardship. That's just all of them are like civic duty, right? You learn that in high school civics, right? Do this, make sure you got any money for that. I'm kind of broke, so that part. So we got to remember that, that piece of it. That's like that though. Young people getting them civically engaged, finding ways to make it positive, learning about voting and all these things. They're just all normal civic duties and things that we should be doing. None of them should be hardships.
I think maybe my whole career for as long as I can do that. Folks wanted to hear, I see them going for it. They wanted to hear the question.
Oh, I just wanted to know how long it's been $15, because it feels like it's been forever.
As long as I can remember.
I don't remember it being.
I think one of the other things to consider, agree with Ellen, one of the major barriers to people serving on jurors is, of course, the limited amount of money that people get every day. But another significant barrier is transportation with the county, because if you live in one part of the county and you're summoned to the other, or even here to Martinez, there is no real helpful way to get from one place to the other. So that would be another thing to think about in terms of funding that might assist getting more diverse juries, given that the court is not likely to change its current practice. And Ellen will remember all the litigation and stuff that has already happened in the past years, but providing some form of transportation so that in different parts of the county, there would be a way for jurors to be able to get from their location into Martinez if that's where, you know, certain trials are held.
I think that's one of the, in the original funding, they talked about, also funding, childcare, transportation, looking at the
Childcare.
barriers. So I agree, those are huge barriers, and that would be good for funding. I mean, I do think that, judges are elected, and what I said at the Board of Supervisors during the budget hearing was, that the Board of Supervisors should either write a letter, pass a resolution, act unanimously to urge the court to change that local rule. And I think we should be speaking out as a body. I think when we do these forums, I don't know if we need to take an official vote today if on board and believe that the rule is unfair, and the racial oversight body would like to speak out against it and urge the court to do so. We can make that motion in a minute, but I do think having this raised to a level, because lots of things happen in quiet courtrooms with lengthy, thick motions and lawyers arguing, but it's a really different to have people in the community asking judges and talking to the court, and there being newspaper articles about what the local court is doing. So I actually think just taking this to a level of public advocacy is something that this original group spotted back in 2018. It had been going on, I think, 7 or 8 years at that time. It is something very much within control of the court to change. Do we need to make a motion? I guess, is there anyone in the group that just substantively does not believe we should urge the court to change and move back to a regional jury selection model?
Did you mention originally misdemeanor cases, or are you talking about all cases?
It said misdemeanor in the 2018 objective. I actually think, especially now that the court is on a direct calendaring system, that if you have a felony case that goes from beginning to end in a Pittsburgh court, it should have regional jurors, and the same thing in any region of the county. So I think it should be, any case in a regional courthouse should draw from the region it's in, period, because you're dealing with the same issue, whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor. But what's different in 2018, that was pre the court's shift to a direct calendaring model. So you never would have seen, unless something, average was happening, a felony jury trial out in Pittsburgh or Richmond before then, and now that's become more the norm for cases from those regions. So
What are other counties doing with respect to regional jury pools versus countywide jury pools?
I mean, my understanding is they're largely regional, but I haven't really studied the counties. I've only been able to really see the effect it's.
And is it still accurate that the more serious types of felonies are all still centered in Martinez for transportation reasons?
It kind of depends, but I think that's mainly correct if it's more serious because of the length of the case or the witnesses, those kinds of things.
Or
You
the
can move
type of
downtown to Martinez, but there are felonies of various levels that happen out in Pittsburgh or in Richmond. It didn't used to be the case.
Ellen, and you may have said that, did they used to be local? Like,
Yes, yes.
Why did they change?
Through 2011. That's a great question. I think the court blamed themselves for this.
I'm trying to remember. Well, see, when they used to be local, but then you have to remember as well, in those days, the what were called the branch courts, or even municipal courts at that time, were only hearing misdemeanor cases. And the felony cases were all still centered in Martinez. So no matter how if you were called as a juror in where you live, it was to hear a misdemeanor case. It was not to hear a felony. And so I think, trying to remember, change 2010.
It was 2011.
2011-ish. Yeah, that it changed.
Before, when it was like that, was there a more racially diverse pool back then? Like you.
Louder. In the local community, I would say, but not in Martinez.
That would be my concern is, are we gonna further this issue if we're drawing a local jury pool, local Martinez courts, if perhaps the defendants for some of the more serious cases aren't
I don't know.
My understanding is they always drew countywide for Martinez, and when they were in the branches, they drew from branches.
Okay.
So folks could come from west and east to Martinez, which is a different level of distance and sacrifice than coming. But now it's having folks completely cross the county.
So in the new model, if you had a felony case out in Richmond, the new model now will pull from the valley, from the east end and from the west end.
Yeah, countywide,
It's countywide, so we'll pull, whereas the old model, it would have stayed
West County.
essentially out
Yeah.
west.
Yeah.
In terms
So
of pulling jurors from the community where the case is being heard. But if the crime, is the case also being heard in the community where the crime was committed?
Yes,
And that is currently happening. So
Yes.
yes.
Although if the more, as DA Becton was saying, more serious cases
really are.
sent to Martinez and be in central Florida.
that's-
But that is still happening to some, to the higher level felonies, kind of the mid to lower level ones are now in the branches. Still neutral.
Does the court retain data on like the jurors and the regional locations for the trials?
I imagine they would.
Do they keep records of like jurors and the regions that they were drawn from for specific trials? In other words, if you had certain cases that were like out west as an example, and you had X amount of cases, how many jurors were actually pulled from that area versus, let's say, the valley or the east end or even central?
I imagine the court would keep that. There's a list generated in every case that attorneys get that has, someone's sort of name and city that they are.
That way you can see the disparity on
Yeah.
what's happened since 20.
Yeah.
And now that you have a new court in Pittsburgh, it seems like they might have the capacity now to draw from that community. Maybe, before it wasn't as big, or it was kind of like, it was a minimal court.
But even when they had the courthouse in the old, remember, it looked like an old elementary school or
Yes.
something? That courthouse always had East County jurors and we did jury trials out there, the people from the region. But yeah, I hear you, but it's a bigger.
It does seem like
bigger
it's more
court
efficient now and more.
and a bigger jury
suitable.
room. Yeah. So this does seem like a good item to discuss at the equity committee meeting.
If we present this, our job presents this to the supervisors and they say, yes, we want to go ahead and sign on to, I don't know, what is it, a statement, is it a position, is it, what is it that would they produce and what kind of question does that get? Of course, don't answer to the board of supervisors.
No, I mean, they can't, the BOS can't direct the court. But they can say, as the folks that are, govern Contra Costa County, if you believe this is having a negative impact on our constituents and on folks that are going through our criminal legal system and our racial justice oversight body is advising us to ask you to return to a model of regionalized jury selection, which you are legally able to do and are choosing not to, right? But I think, again, it's an issue where it's always up to the courts. They are always taking feedback from folks across the community, and of course, having the local elected official let them know, because again, I haven't talked to any supervisors individually about it, but it did seem from the feedback we were getting during budget that they felt, and I know they feel strongly about, having things in the community happen in the community, and so this, with that vision, right, furthering.
I think one more thing to consider, because I'm not against the proposal, that's not why I'm going to be saying this, but I think there's a lot of nuances that we have to consider when we're thinking about whether the jury pool selection should come from a region, and also defining what that means, what is a regionalized jury and what does that look like? In addition to something else that I think happened maybe about 12 years ago from the court's perspective, when looking at whether they should change the different the model that they're using now, which is the county-wide draw. And trying to figure out if they change that and they drew the lines in different ways, like they said, okay, if you are from, I don't know, Orinda, San Pablo, wherever, that this is where, you know, your jury pool will come from. And then, so trying to figure out some of those regionalized models. One of the things that a consultant was able to also uncover is that whenever you change, whatever configuration you chose, it could also have a disparate impact on another aspect of the draw of the jury that nobody had anticipated. So, for example, if you drew this boundary, it might mean that you have a disparate number of African Americans, but if you drew this boundary, you had a disparate showing of Hispanic Americans. So no matter, it was like, you have to really kind of think about like, where are we really gonna draw these pools from? Because each configuration has a different impact on what that jury is gonna look like and what the composition is gonna be.
Yeah, I hear you that it's complex, but I don't think it's that they have to study the boundaries. They had the boundaries. They chose to abandon the boundaries.
Right.
We've, you know, advocated that they go back to their model, and they haven't said, no, we've studied it and this is the model that's best for, best for
Or
racial.
the most diverse.
Yeah, and no, I hear you. Everything is gonna have a consequence one way or another, but I do strongly believe that we've seen it, even in a county where it was very difficult to have a diverse jury, it's gotten even more difficult after the court made these changes, and that's what we're seeing on the front lines of trying to defend folks. But yeah, I mean, it would be helpful. The court has the, you know, the information. I'm happy to forward the letter we received, but the information, you know, that I read you was that was the court's response. No, thank you. We're gonna keep our local rule in place that we've enshrined without really having a lot of outside consultation. So.
Would be open to a hybrid model, meaning like 50% would have to draw from the region and then you can go outside?
Yeah, I don't know if they have considered a hybrid model. That's a good question. I have no question about that.
I mean, something.
Yeah, but I think, you know, it's up to the court, and I do think if there's advocacy on this front, the court can respond and say, you know, we've been thoughtful and here's why we're doing X, Y, Z, or we're choosing to modify it this or the other way. So I would still urge us to push forward, because certainly the ball is in their court. You know, to Peter's question, the BOS does not control them. This body does not control them. But again, they do serve the community and the public, and they are elected officials. And I don't know if other courts have made this strange change to their response to other jurisdictions. Right, right. I know all counties, so it's kind of like, once you get into the weeds, it's sometimes not. There aren't always all of the parallels. But yeah, great question.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say that, yeah, it would be nice to hear the explanation because they may have a good answer. They might, I don't know, you know, it could be a good reason. Maybe it was just a shrunk, maybe it wasn't getting a lot of people. They decided we'll have a larger pool, I don't know. But I'm saying, you know, it would be nice to, you know, sometime to get an explanation from thought process of an entity that serves the community. I get that gets lost sometime when the community don't have a say in community stuff. Like, isn't it the community? I don't know. So that's just.
Anyone else on the body have other comments? Additional public comments. Then move us to number 8, which is discuss racial bias training.
Yeah, so this was another item that, from your work plan, this body decided to at least revisit, which was let's see, objective 1, seek funding to implement improved, procedural justice practices and implicit bias training. I think after the last conversation, it was, what was discussed was that, for the implicit bias training, focuses on that specifically on implicit bias. So there's a range of biases that are essentially being addressed, or the way in which bias plays a role about the number of different identities is addressed in implicit bias training. And there was a lot of criticism about the previous training that was provided in the past through Congress that specifically spoke to procedural justice and implicit bias. And so the idea was to maybe bring back or start to think about, well, are there racial bias, specifically racial bias trainings that could be potentially looked into, or that this body would want to explore as sort of the next step or part 2 to the procedural justice and implicit bias training that took place several years ago. And I'm not sure if this is something that the Burns Institute, if you guys do anything specific or aware of any specific racial bias related trainings, or a variety of agencies that are working in the criminal justice space. I'm sure there's something great to Chris, but it's something for the body to consider and think.
Isn't the organization, refresh my memory, that you guys are working with, aren't they do a lot of this work also? Oh, who are
The CP.
Is that what
Center for Policing
Yes,
Equity.
thank you. I'm like, oh, their name's escaping me.
Yeah, I think they do. I don't know that they're doing it directly.
Okay.
No.
She's like, let me answer that.
I understand it, but I'll just say that it's really difficult for some community members to see people not from a community. It's really difficult to see some individuals not from a community and no experience, have never gotten a call that said, you know, when you accept a collect call doing a training about such a sensitive issue.
Are you talking about fog?
So that group also, that I love, Joe and his group, they're also not reflective of the community. They're doing some great work with BART on a policy level, have done some great work with your office. But when I start thinking about the characteristics needed for a group of people to do any training, lived experience rises to the top for me, and reflection of the community. And that's why the first time I ever called this body was when I heard Fog Break was going to be doing that. But they don't necessarily represent lived experience or skill set to do that type of training.
I think that's something that Cheryl always brought up there.
I know Jewel Legacy was mentioned earlier, and I know they have expanded, but to do that type of training. Right.
If I may chime in here, I'll just say that in terms of more broadly what these types of trainings look like, it's not something directly that the Burns Institute does. Obviously, we have plenty to say as an organization about race and racial equity. It usually does not look like bias trainings. It goes to the extent that we are involved with it. It goes a lot deeper than that. Some of you have been a part of the Reimagine Youth Justice space and seen the history curriculum. Like it's pretty extensive stuff that just kind of, you know, spells some things out in ways that we know will make people uncomfortable. That's just part of the work. I think that's the approach that we take as an organization, and also making space for that, and trying to help people unpack what they're uncomfortable about. And so, that is something that we could offer. I don't, it can open a can of worms for you. And so it just is something that folks have to be really serious about doing, that level of work to get into. What I would also say is, in addition to something like that, which is, on the deeper end, and I don't even mean to try to place these on a spectrum, but I'm aware of or familiar with um, the very aptly named Racial Equity Institute, that does these types of trainings. And I have not directly attended any of their sessions, but what I have done in another site is seen the impact, and heard people speak about the experience they've had. I think the best plug I could make for them is that I heard a judge that I had been working with for a long time, who is a white male, say, I thought I had been, he said, I thought I had been hitting a home run all my life, and I have learned that I started at second base. So, that I think that is the type of takeaways that you want people to be considering. And I don't know exactly what the process is or what their training is, but the folks who have spoken to it seem to think it was, extensive and very well done, and it produced at least that anecdotal result. So might be worth looking at or reaching out. I don't have any direct contacts there because, again, I wasn't directly involved. I just know that there was a whole process to select them, and then that their training started. And yeah, folks seem to be really impacted. So that's probably the only example I could give, because overall, and I think somebody was speaking to this earlier, certainly I think we see the need for this type of training as an organization, but realize that so many trainings fall short of what do you do with this awareness now that you have it? How does it live in terms of your work, in terms of your interactions with people? Like, how do you actually make it mean something that is not merely conceptual or theoretical, but that impacts the way that you show up? And I think, for us, we're a little bit more, or we try to be a little bit more poised in that space than the, sort of the general awareness of the issue space. And it's just a different approach. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, and I think all of this is still complex and takes a bunch of different bites at the apple to figure it out. So
Who are we proposing or suggesting the target audience of this training be? Are we talking about vetting it so that the county would adopt a framework or a vendor or an overall curriculum? Because if so, looking at you, Peter, this feels like it falls very much in that office's kind of scope of authority versus this body's necessary scope of authority. Or are we, I wasn't sure, when we talk about the training, who are we intending to train or propose to be trained?
I would think it would be anyone who makes a decision about the outcome for someone in our judges all the way down. DA,
Across the board. That is the task force recommendation. I think that this is aimed at, is both police and county and anybody in the criminal justice system who works in the criminal justice system participate. And so it has been, the county.
Yeah.
I know that we, and now we also implemented for our advisory bodies. And then I think you guys are also various programs that are.
We are, I don't know if Kendra wanted to maybe chime in on this one.
Yeah.
Wanna-
Yeah, I was gonna say that, I see that the lead and the team is the full R job and the ORJ, and we'd be willing to, and would love to, sort of workshop this and bring some recommendations back. We, in the ORESJ, were, working on some countywide racial equity. We're examining the current countywide racial, implicit bias training, and want to bring some recommendations. I think that was Jill. I can't see and I can't hear all that well, but I think Jill just mentioned like the implicit bias training, that that advisory bodies, have to take right now. But our office, this is one of our initiatives for this year, and so we'd be willing to work on this because, um, and right now we are trying to identify vendors, so the Racial Equity Institute is helpful. There's, our library right now has, a partnership that they really appreciate, a consultant that's doing racial equity trainings there. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say we'd be willing to sort of like workshop and partner on this and, yeah, and find a training that, you know, that is, outcomes based. So.
Something else, yes, this is Jill, sorry, my voice isn't projecting these days.
No, it's, don't, you can't take too much responsibility. It's the audio.
It's an and. So I've done a few implicit bias trainings, but also did the procedural justice piece of it that we think you guys did. Somebody did, 360.
No, it was Ballbridge.
It was Ballbridge that did it. And so that's another piece that I'm wondering for this group, if that would be something, it's an and,
Yeah.
like both, because it answers that, okay, now you have the information. How does it play out in space?
I think in an ideal world, right? So as Kendra mentioned, we're already trying to revisit the county's implicit bias trainings that all county employees have to do. And wanting to kind of be more intentional in having it address equity in the way I think Chris was speaking to, be a little bit more impactful in terms of how we think about how we do our work. But for this body, the training is going to be even more customized, I guess, or catered to the particular work in the justice system. So I think in an ideal world, how do we come up with a training, a suite of training that speak to the needs of different spaces where people are working, because people are encountering different things, right? And have to kind of engage with the community, serve the community in different ways, in different capacities. But that's pretty big, pretty big lift. So yeah, Ken and I would love to be a part of whatever kind of working group design team that this group puts together around the trainings that you would do here for the justice system partners, so that we align with and dovetail with the other kind of countywide training, so we're not like moving in different directions, but also honoring that each space has its own needs.
I saw Chris hand up first and then Cheryl. But Chris took his hand down, so I'm not sure if he's still, okay, you're good. Cheryl?
Yeah, Cheryl has a comment. Christopher?
Yeah, so my hand was raised because Cheryl sent me a message that she wanted me to pass along. But when I saw her hand go up, I thought that somehow she was going to communicate it. I know that she's not able to actually speak right now, which is why she sent the message. And shout out to her for being dedicated enough to still be on the call. So I am reading the messages that she sent that I think are pretty well in line with some of the comments that Gigi has already made. But it reads, my previous statements and positions on this subject still stand. The emphasis on bias minimizes the experiences of Black and brown persons being tremendously harmed by the criminal legal and punishment system. The notion of using so-called allies again centers white feelings and reactions, wants and desires, and although some are learning lessons from their trainings, it is not ideal to center them as trainers. Testimonial speakers during the training, certainly. Leading, no. I think that concludes the thoughts that she shared. I was a step ahead of you.
I guess I do have one other thing. So the training that all bodies have to take, that 45-minute kind of virtual training is never gonna really truly hit the mark. It's a check the box approach to saying, I know a little bit more than I did. I might forget tomorrow when I'm actually sitting in the spot and have to use the tools.
And I think to that point, I was kind of to the point, we got 11,000 employees in the county, but I don't know if we're going to be able to do one-on-one or in-person meetings for all 11,000. So I think should be some virtual option for a big group of folks where that's kind of the base level. But to, I think Gigi's point earlier, decision makers, or I also want to add people who are engaging folks directly in their everyday scope of work. That's the folks I think if we can get more intensive training, but persons with small groups, you have folks that are a little more engaged and it's more dynamic. That's going to be, I think, more impactful. So we got to have to like both and like both.
Especially in the places where there's racial disparities in those systems. You need to allocate it, because if you've been taking a training year after year after year and you don't see an improvement, then obviously that training is not hitting the mark.
Then we can move to item 9, this is to discuss the recalibration and configuration of our job.
So, here's another item that was discussed at your last meeting, as well as a discussion point that was presented through Chris's presentation to the Equity Committee as an opportunity for the hard job to really consider how best to move it to work forward, given the challenges and strains that this body has experienced over the last few years, I would say. But I also think this is a great opportunity to also revisit the work ahead, being that the recommendations formalized back in 2018, and there's been a lot of work in the justice space in the county that hit on a lot of the various recommendations where that work has evolved over the last several years. And so, this is a discussion point for the body to really think through in what ways can this body be effective in moving forward existing work that has some development to it and can be potentially progressed in a more formal way. And also in looking back and seeing the trend of how the work has evolved over time. When I mean work, I mean the evolution of work that has taken place in the county overall in the justice space. Where then can this body begin to essentially recalibrate and rethink its strategy, this work moving forward.
So I'll just jump in here really quickly to say, given the amount of time that we have left, it's probably a conversation that we'll have to continue. And point of order, I suppose I am at liberty to discuss that we've had a recent departure from the body. Stop me now. I say who.
Yeah, so we have, another community representative who, has resigned from the body, Michael Pearson, due to some other personal commitments that, have now taken forefront, for him. It takes away from his commitment to this body. So, so we do have another vacancy in that.
Thank you. And that's relevant because Michael was one of the I think most emphatic members about what is implementation. If that is our charge, it involves more action than, sort of what we are doing. And I bring that up just to say, even though he's no longer a member, on my end, I think it is worth reaching out to him to see if he had any ideas about what he would like to see, how he would have envisioned a more active role, that could help at least to start a conversation, a more robust conversation about what the more active role for the R job could be or could look like. One of the things for me that comes to mind, and is not universally applicable, and so it can't necessarily be the only thing, but something worth chewing on, is the potential to to pilot recommendations on a small scale, depending on what they are and what that would entail when that applies. Like, saying here's a recommendation that we have, we'd like to move this forward in this way. Can we do it in a, essentially like we're running this by you for approval to at least move forward in, a city or zip code or whatever the case may be in some way. And then to study that, and based on the results to determine if this is something that really needs to be fully considered for implementation. That again does not apply to every recommendation you have, but could be, a step forward, or at least a thought or consideration in terms of ways that the role could be redeveloped, so as to move something or have an idea, or some sort of forward progress on these, as opposed to a lot of sort of kicking things back and forth. But just, open to as many ideas and concepts as we can come up with for what this could look like, in order to make the most of your time, and for you all to feel that you're fulfilling the not only the charge that the R job has been given, but also your whys for being here, right? We want to honor that as well. And so just want to encourage you all, whether, in the upcoming subcommittee meetings, or in the next quarterly meeting before the September meeting with with the equity committee, to really let's start thinking about what we might like to see, not just to, I think it's important to be able to say that the limits of this are very, very real and very frustrating for us, but I think it's also important to be able to speak to where you might like to see things go, what sorts of ideas you'd like to see considered in terms of how the R job might serve in order to be more active going forward.
A mission statement and vision statement.
You have a charge, it's on your, racial justice oversight body, website. But ultimately, the charge of this body is to, oversee the implementation of the Racial Justice Task Force recommendations, which are aimed to reduce disparities in legal justice.
Any other questions or comments? Down, the last item on the agenda is to discuss reports from our job subcommittees. We do have a report from C subcommittee, which is attachment number 5, page 20. Would you like to report out? I just got here. I just got here.
Just report out on our last meeting.
Mhm.
Recap.
Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot.
Raise
No
the money.
pressure.
They was raising money. For the most part, it was a tough meeting. We had to cut, we got abruptly, stop, but, for the most part, you know, we were talking about how to, form a way to make that subcommittee, produce, right? And you know, I just was looking at the, you know, community engagement fund. Fund was a word I focused on, and you know, had me thinking about funds, and then the engagement piece in the community. So, because you know we've been trying to do some things, and I was just gonna take it by, you know, the horns. It was like, hey, you know what? Let's get out there. Let's start talking about getting down in the community and you know, making an impact on what we're really trying to do, and getting engaged with the community and trying to find out what the community needs and how can we help them and how can we merge these this philosophy around you know, what the community needs, why we here, and things of that nature. However, we didn't have a lot of people at the meeting. We had to cut our meeting short a little bit, but that's where we were at, and we're still in dialogue about how to approach that, which way we want to go, and do we have enough people, you know, ready for that to go to the next level with the CEF subcommittee. That's just a report out on our last meeting.
Any questions or comments?
Chris?
Chris?
Well, thank you. The next steps, as you see, essentially what we're trying to do with the CEF. So we have had a robust conversation about community capacity fund. That is something that we want to revisit, but top priority for the CEF committee is the CE, because we want to make sure that there are more community members, if possible, in these meetings, and certainly in the community engagement and funding subcommittee meetings, which we recognize may mean that they need to move to a different time, and physical locations as necessary, as that may be, depending on you know, upcoming rule changes potentially that might impact that. But we know that we need more community input, that we want community to know, you know, what we are charged with and what we are attempting to do, but also to hear directly from community about how they would want us to proceed, or how their input and feedback about what, you know, so many of these initiatives, projects, undertakings should look like as we hopefully accomplish them, right? And so wanting to make sure that that there's, you know, an abundance of community attendance, and that we're hearing their voices, and able to also communicate or be the communication arm in a way of the our job. So even the things that are happening in diversion community of folks between the hours of 9 and 5 are not able to attend a diversion community meeting, being able to at some community engagement and funding subcommittee space, or through some community engagement and funding activity, have a sense of what has happened in diversion or data, or at the full body meeting, and also to create a feedback loop to ensure that we're as informed by community input, feedback, interests, and advocacy as we possibly can be.
I would say, like, I know data doesn't have a summary because we haven't met for a while, but I do remember, like, Ronell actually hosted a community input or listening session. And so I think that's something that the data subcommittee has also been talking about. How do we utilize the data that we're collecting, and how do we want it to be, quote unquote, broadcast out to communities? I think us working together and making something, accessible to community is key. Any other questions? I won't hold you all, if there's nothing.
Oh, yeah, though there's no report out from diversion subcommittee, but they will be hosting a special meeting on May 14th at 9:30 a.m. Location to be determined. We are running into a bit of a hurdle there with finding a meeting space, but for anyone who wishes to attend, not a member of diversion, you're welcome to join virtually. But if you are a member of diversion, you should show up in person. Somewhere. But we will try to find a backup location.
For the whole body?
No, sorry, just for the diversion subcommittee. Sorry.
Oh, wait.
No red alert.
If there's no further comment, we will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. And see you all back here August 1st, 1 to 4. And I'm guessing that location is to be.
No, it is on you guys' calendar.
Okay. There you go.
Calendar invite that has the location for the August 1st meeting.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.